So today, here on the podcast, we'll explore the announcements from Destination D and what they mean for the future of the Disney company. I should point out that I'm recording this intro and the first segment 3 days before the event actually begins. I'm recording on Wednesday, August 27th, and I'll record the rest of it after the event once I'm in Florida. It's possible that there will be no big announcements, and then I'll find myself having to, instead, write up a super detailed review of Beacon Barrel, that new lounge over at the Magic Kingdom that will also open this weekend. So if in 15 minutes you hear me discussing how various rums pair with juice mixers, you will know that in terms of announcements, Destination D was a total bust, though there was probably an interesting exploration of both Walt-era Good Neighbor films and also a couple of more recent Disney animated features such as The Emperor's New Groove. So I will start with my predictions, mostly as a way to talk about where I see the corporate stresses and strategies that will influence how this event is put together. We'll also crunch a bunch of numbers, and then recording in my hotel room in Florida, we'll explore what was actually announced. Or possibly this again will turn into a really long and very detailed appreciation of that new Burger Bird animatronic over at Beacon Barrel. Also, I'm recording what I can right now before I head out to Florida in the attempt to get this episode out as soon as possible early next week. And now one more important thing. Before we get started today, I need to thank another round of our Bandcamp subscribers. These right here are the people who keep this whole enterprise going. We're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. I am grateful for each and every one of our Bandcamp subscribers because without them, this podcast would simply cease to exist. A special note of thanks today is going out to a few new subscribers, including Aaron, Cooper, Hatbox Mania, and Disney Runner 55. Gratitude is going out to you and to all of our Bandcamp subscribers for supporting all of the things we do here. And now let's push on to Destination D. Again, along with the intro today, I'm recording up my predictions and thoughts about Destination D here on Wednesday, August 27th, a little over a day before I step onto a plane and head to Florida for the event itself. My prediction list includes things that may be announced as well as a couple of long shots that likely won't. Also, I should put this up front. Though the D23 event in Anaheim almost always has meaningful announcements for film and the parks, that is, if you subtract out that really odd D23 that happened under Bob Chapek, Destination D in Florida doesn't always have this. These events have two different identities. D23 in Anaheim, which right now, after a post-pandemic shift, is on even-numbered years, and Destination D in Orlando, which now is on odd-numbered years. D23 in Anaheim tends to focus on the entire company, everything from a sparsely attended exhibit area for ESPN to a walkthrough display related to Hulu's Murders in the Building, from signings for Disney Edition books to vinyl sales overseen by the Disney Music Emporium. Destination D, however, that's the event this year, is more focused on the history of the company, the American parks, streaming offerings, and theatrical films. And typically, that's about it. Whereas the D23 event, or the D23 Expo as it used to be called, has simultaneous presentations on multiple stages, the Destination D event in Florida has just one stage with all attendees watching the same programming all weekend long. I've seen Destination D events where the programming leans almost wholly into the history of the company with hardly any announcements for upcoming projects. And I've seen some years with announcements. The 2023 Destination D event announced that Zootopia would take over the Tree of Life at Animal Kingdom. Likewise, the new Country Bear musical jamboree was also announced at the 2023 Destination D, so retheming of existing attractions are one type of announcement familiar to Destination D. Beyond this, Disney tends to offer more details about already announced projects at Destination D. In 2023, for example, there were additional details offered for Tiana's Bayou Adventure. And lastly, Disney tends to announce opening dates or opening seasons for attractions under construction. One more thing here. Destination D, as it's in Florida, tends to be more focused on Florida than in California, so typically the Disneyland announcements here are minor. And what's missing from this, at least in years past, are large new announcements for complete attractions or lands. So that's generally the multi-year framework for how Destination D works in terms of announcements, at least historically. But this year, something unusual happened about a week before Destination D. Disney dropped a bunch of Destination D level announcements pre-event. And this, I'll point out, changes the usual calculus here. So let's walk down what was announced the week leading up to Destination D. For Rock and Roller Coaster, Disney put up new artwork and a storyline, in which Electric Mayhem and the Muppets mostly take over the role of Aerosmith inside the attraction. Electric Mayhem are in the studio recording new material when they need to get across town for a concert, and they're taking us with them. Sound familiar? As with the Aerosmith version, most of the Muppets will be projections on screens in that pre-show area, except for the sound engineer Scooter and his penguin assistants, who will be animatronics. Remember those animatronic penguin figures over in Muppet Vision 3D? Odds are a couple of them are now ending up here. And if they're here, perhaps some other animatronics from Muppet Vision 3D might end up elsewhere in the attraction as well, such as in the post-show area. And that last part was not an official announcement, it was just a thought I had. But you know, Statler and Waldorf have to be reused somewhere, right? And I realize putting the animatronics from Muppet Vision 3D here plays against any narrative of Muppet Vision 3D showing up somewhere else at the park, but maybe that's where we are right now. And I realize that's not what everybody wants to hear, but from my perspective, I would much rather have those animatronics reused in some attraction as opposed to them being shelved in some deep storage area never to be seen again by the public. For the refurbished Big Thunder, Disney revealed that it will have an upgraded opening sequence, a remade rainbow caverns, colorful lights illuminating stalactites and stalagmites, as well as juice-toned pools of water swirling around beneath the train. There's newly released artwork that details the train moving through a reimagined underground cave, and the text that accompanied this release suggests that there will be more changes to the ride when it reopens in 2026. Riders will now dodge exploding dynamite and falling boulders, which is a fair description of the final showroom scene for the California version of Big Thunder, when inside of a mine tunnel a lit fuse quickly burns its way down to the explosives, which then sets off a series of fiery projection effects. So I think we can expect something similar here too. In short, the revamped version of Big Thunder sounds like it will be a lot like the 2014 version of the California ride with its effects and indoor show areas. Next, we have an opening date for the new show that's presently being installed in the Tree of Life, Zootopia Better Zoogather. It will open on November 7th, slightly earlier than expected. I had pegged it for the week before Thanksgiving. Now it's going to open a few weeks before Thanksgiving. Also, there will be a new character in this attraction, a wolf named Heidi Howler narrating the show. And so with this, I'm starting to wonder if the main characters from the Zootopia franchise, specifically Judy and Nick, are consciously being saved to have a larger role in a yet-to-be-announced Zootopia attraction elsewhere at Animal Kingdom. There's something like that, over at Shanghai, but I think that might be part of the equation here to save those characters for something else that might show up later. And one last little thing. Disney walked out an image of the revamped ride vehicles for Buzz Lightyear's Space Ranger Spin for when this presently closed and soon-to-be updated attraction will premiere next year. Oh, and the score screens no longer tap out at $999,999. The new score screens will allow guests to rack up over 1 million points. So now, how many times do you need to hit that really small space in the middle of Zurg's chest plate to take in well over 1 million points? So by preempting typical Destination D announcements a week before Destination D, this really changes the arrangement for announcements at Destination D. But exactly how does it change it? Does this mean that with various Destination D level announcements already out there, the actual announcements at Destination D will be larger than usual? Or does this mean that Destination D will focus almost entirely on the history of the company, and that would also mean that the second half of our show will be a very, very detailed exploration of Beacon Barrel? As I mentioned earlier, sometimes there's very little in terms of park or film announcements at Destination D, but I'm hopeful that that will not be the case this year. So even with the early announcements, let me walk down where I think there will be some likely areas of discussion at the event this year with my underlying rationale. For the last 2.5 years since Bob Chapek was essentially fired, Disney has been trying to play catch-up in terms of new additions to the park, both to increase investor confidence, that is, after investors specifically identified parks as a sagging element in the company's portfolio, and by extension to also increase excitement among fans and to increase park visitation, particularly in Florida. Florida has been the more problematic segment of the domestic parks portfolio since revenge travel ended a couple of years ago. And in looking over the schedule, I do think there's a possibility for perhaps one new attraction area to be announced that would stretch how Destination D works in terms of a PR event for Disney. And as Disney is now holding Destination D in its largest Florida venue, this year the event will be held in the Coronado Springs Convention Hall, which is far, far larger than the hall over at the Contemporary where it was held 2 years ago. This will add about 2,000 more people to the event, which will give it a little more of the feel of the large D23 stage in Anaheim. In terms of looking over the schedule, let me start with the element that most confuses me. The theme for this Destination D event is a journey around the worlds of Disney. And under this theme, there are 4 Disney Around the Globe presentation segments that focus on individual countries, 2 of them each day. They will be arranged in this order. On Saturday, first India in the morning, and then Japan in the afternoon. And maybe I should point out that I think it's important that India is first. On Sunday, first China, and then France. And before I go down my own little rabbit hole, I should probably point out that I've thought about this so much that I'm pretty sure I'm overthinking it and that nothing will come out of it, but still, let's go down that rabbit hole. So, in terms of the Disney Parks film and ecosphere, there's one country on this list that is not like the other. First up, Japan, China, and France are all home to Disney parks but not India. I think it's really an extreme long shot that a park would be announced for India, especially at Destination D, an extreme long shot. But in terms of population and economic centers that are occasionally suggested as likely places of expansion for Disney, it's usually India, Brazil, and then maybe Vietnam. So let's just move on now to the next area on the list, but at least we've put this one here. Second, Japan, China, and France all have World Showcase pavilions, but not India. I should point out that India does have some representation in Animal Kingdom, both with animals and attraction theming, such as with Kali River Rapids. But announcing a pavilion, let alone a park, seems significantly outside the historic scope of what is presented at Destination D. And so now, third, and admittedly I'm moving lower on the list of interest areas, Japan, China, and France all have one, if not multiple, table service restaurants dedicated to their country's cuisine. There is an India-focused quick service restaurant at Disney Springs, also some restaurants such as Tiffin's and Sanaa that have elements of Indian cuisine on their menus, but there's no traditional table service Indian restaurant at the Disney World Resort. Fourth, Adventures by Disney, again, even a little bit further down that list because of how few people these Adventures by Disney tours serve. But there are standalone Adventures by Disney guided tours of Japan, China, and France. There's actually multiple tour offerings that include France, but none for India. Or maybe the connection has something to do with film, but here only France is a notable location for a range of Disney and Pixar animated films, such as Hunchback, Ratatouille, Aristocats, and beyond this, Cinderella, Tangled, and Sleeping Beauty all have some ties to stories that originated or were further developed in France. China has Mulan, Japan has sections of Cars 2 and its culture and architecture partially inspired San Francisco and Big Hero 6, and India has the Jungle Book, so I don't think the connection here is that of animation. But at least to me, it seems there are some odd overlaps with 3 of the countries on this list, with India being the outlier. It could be that this is just an unusual coincidence in terms of programming. In fact, I suspect that's actually what's going on here. It's possible that Disney wants to tout the rebranding of the Disney Plus Hotstar streamer in India as Jio Hotstar, which involved a merger earlier this year between 2 streamers, Disney Plus Hotstar and Jio Cinema. I can see that as kind of an odd possibility, but I keep noticing the long shot possibility here, and it is a long shot, that there might be some type of World Showcase Pavilion or park-related announcement involving India, especially as India is the lead-in segment here. And if there is a parks-related announcement involving India or Indian culture, it should engage the audience and key the crowd in for presentations to follow. But admittedly, once again, this is a real long shot, and maybe the India segment turns out to be a little about the rebranded Disney streamer in India, with some clips of Mumbai Madness, that's the Paul Ruddish Mickey Mouse cartoon from a few years ago, and then a discussion of Mira, Royal Detective, that's the Disney Junior series set in an Indian-inspired kingdom, with some Baloo and Mowgli thrown in, as well as, a short montage of India-focused sections of Feathered Friends in Flight over at Animal Kingdom. But between us here, this lineup of India, Japan, China, and France has me scratching my head a little, especially with India leading the sequence. And there's a really good chance here that I've thought about this connection far more than Disney has. But at least in my mind, especially with India leading these 4 topical presentations, there's something here that's just not fully linking up, but I'm not sure what it is. I will put out this possibility to tie up this section. I can see Disney using this opportunity at Destination D to weave in India as a way of culturally connecting India with Disney a little more, as a slow-step plan moving forward that leads eventually, perhaps a few years down the road, to some larger announcement so that at that future time, by essentially building connections for fans and also investors, it will seem like a more natural step forward for the company. But now on to things that I think are a little more likely for this weekend, those elements that fall under the rubric of past Destination D announcements, specifically more details for previously announced projects. That's generally what happens at Destination D. So somewhere near the list of my mostly realistic options here is that we'll get more details for Villains Land. I think this is a great project. Also, I should probably point out that it does look like some land prep work has actually started back on the acreage that's devoted to villains behind the now drained rivers of America. But there's also now a really odd equation here for modern-day Disney. Under Iger, the parks have heavily, and I mean heavily, focused on IP from more recent animated films that are then brought into the parks. Frozen, Ratatouille, Zootopia, Coco, the Paul Ruddish Mickey and Minnie, Tiana, Toy Story, Monsters Incorporated, and so on. Disney has pretty much planted its flag in this line of planning, that more recent IP is going to be a better driver of attendance than classic Walt-era IP. But most of these films don't have classic and popular villains. Villains, at least in the classic Disney sense, are those characters who work primarily with either malevolence or deep self-interest combined with a disregard for the well-being of others. Also, to be a classic villain, at least as I see it, they have style, some swagger, charm, compelling eccentricity, and so on. In recent films, Mother Gothel falls into this category, as does Dr. Facilier. But using this definition, is there a classic and also deeply memorable villain in Toy Story, Monsters Incorporated, Inside Out, Frozen, Wreck-It Ralph, and so on? Sure, there's Prince Hans, Bellwether, Te-Ka, and Ernesto de la Cruz. But at least in my opinion, all of these pale in terms of power, style, and ambition compared to the Queen of Hearts, Maleficent, the Evil Queen, Captain Hook, and so on. And right now, this is on full display on both coasts in terms of the Halloween parades at Oogie Boogie Bash and Mickey's Not So Scary. Disney tends to pivot away from recent movies to present either older villains or park elements with Halloween tones, such as Hitchhiking Ghost or Pirates, or film elements that align with Halloween themes, such as the Sanderson sisters. So it will be interesting to see if Disney is going to embrace its best-known villains, even if they are from older films, for this new Villains Land. Again, Maleficent, Hook, Queen of Hearts, Cruella, and so on. Or if Disney is going to find some way to tone this land so that it includes more nods to recent films. I'm guessing that some of this will be answered at the Destination D event, maybe with an actual name for what we have all been calling Villains Land. Maybe also with some more details about the land itself. But if land prep is starting on the project, there is almost surely some locked down plot plan for the overall area, even if the small details are still in flux. The next reasonable prediction concerns California. There's a natural overlap between hyping the new Avatar film called Fire and Ash out later this year and also hyping the Avatar Land project for DCA. Disney is going to close Mike and Sully to the rescue at DCA to prepare for the Avatar project very soon. I peg this type of discussion as a modest bet for the weekend, though maybe a nod or two to this project might come with the announcement of film elements as opposed to something more centered on the parks. Also, in terms of film park crossovers, I wouldn't be surprised to see some small details about a sequel to the live-action Lilo and Stitch. Lilo is Disney's top-grossing film so far in 2025, and by a lot. It's also the number 2 film worldwide after Ne Zha 2, a film that only took in $22 million domestically, but took in $1.9 billion worldwide, with nearly all of that in China. And by that I mean it took in $1.8 billion out of the $1.9 billion in China. So in terms of 2025 film IP that speaks to an American and European audience, and therefore an audience that might affect the American parks, Lilo is the highest grossing 2025 film in terms of audience penetration that influences decisions for the California and Florida parks. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was some discussion or hint as to how this project will be leveraged in some way for the U.S. parks, and here I'm mostly thinking Magic Kingdom. Next up, whatever happened to Bluey? Back in 2024, there was an actual announcement that Bluey and members of the Healer family, due to a new licensing agreement, would soon appear in the American parks, specifically beginning spring 2025, that is, months ago. These characters simply failed to appear in the parks. For families with younger kids, that is, Disney Parks' core audience, these are some of the most beloved contemporary characters on screens. It's hard to imagine that Disney would not utilize this agreement in the near future with some type of what Disney now calls activations, or what we here might more casually call a themed meet and greet area. Beyond all this, assuming Destination D keeps to their traditions, I can see the possibility that we'll see some more minor updates about the Coco attraction at DCA. Also, another piece of art or two for the Tropical Americas project at Animal Kingdom. We might even get a name for the Indy or the Encanto rides. I'd expect both of these names to be the type of really long official names that Disney loves right now, with at least one full colon in the middle of them, names that no one's going to use in casual conversation. Whatever they're officially called, people will likely call these attractions Indy and Encanto. But still, maybe the official names will reveal a little more of their narrative and show elements. It's possible as well that we might get a second helping of details about Big Thunder, the Muppet version of Rock and Roller Coaster, and Zootopia. And possibly Disney might walk out a few more details about the expansion to Avengers Campus at DCA. I was just in DCA a few days ago. Construction on that expansion area is moving very quickly. I know others in the community have pegged the Lion King log ride in Paris on their list of possibilities as to what will be discussed at Destination D. In the past, Destination D has focused primarily on Florida, with some occasional announcements for California. D23, on the other hand, has been the place for announcements about the international parks. But perhaps this is the year, with the much larger convention space at Coronado Springs, that Disney expands out the identity of Destination D to take on some elements that used to be handled at the bigger D23 convention in Anaheim. And here now is one project. Even though it's one of the most noticeable construction sites anywhere on the Disney World property, that I don't think we're going to hear much about. I don't think there's going to be much attention to Lakeshore Lodge, which is an absolutely massive resort hotel area being built next to Bay Lake. There may be a little info such as a new piece of art, but not much. This is the new, very large hotel structure pretty much right behind Pioneer Hall. It will be part cash hotel and part DVC timeshare. I could be wrong, I admit, about the lack of material about Lakeshore Lodge, but to hype this hotel now will draw attention away from the recently opened Polynesian Tower. This becomes a business strategy issue for Disney. So here's the underlying problem with highlighting Lakeshore Lodge right now. As of July 2025, Disney has only sold just over 22% of the DVC points allotted to the Polynesian Tower. So if you want to take a look at this as a business model, there are just over 3.6 million DVC timeshare points associated with the Polynesian Tower. These points are priced at $235 each. There's various discounts for DVC purchases, for buying various minimum numbers of points, for being a D23 member, and so on. So I'm just going to estimate that the actual average price for a purchased point here is $220. So now brace yourself for this math. The total sale price for the points in the tower is roughly $800 million. In the world of theme parks, that's a huge number. So to put this in perspective, Animal Kingdom, when it was built back in the 90s, cost around $800 million as well. Admittedly, today, that $800 million for Animal Kingdom would be more like $1.3 billion, and for clarity, that would be the version of the park before Pandora, Expedition Everest, Kali River, and everything else that was added after its opening. But even in 2025 dollars, the gross revenue from the island tower over at the Polynesian would cover the development and construction of about 62% of a new Animal Kingdom park. And beyond that, DVC members who have this as their home resort presently pay $7.93 per point per year for maintenance, staffing, updates, refurbishments, and so on. So, in addition to the $800 million in sales revenue, Disney also receives another $28.5 million per year to operate the tower. At least that's the annual figure once all the points are sold. And though there can be an exception here and there, these DVC fees typically go up about 4% a year to account for inflation and higher insurance rates and higher labor costs and so on. But here's the problem. The Polynesian Tower has had points for sale for almost a year. But of those 3.6 million points worked into the tower arrangement, only 804,000 have sold so far. And this is not unusual. It typically takes a while for DVC properties to sell out their points. But at this rate, it will take about 3 more years to sell out the Poly Tower points, maybe a little bit longer, as there tends to be higher sales rates during a property's first year. So that there is the long explanation as to why I don't think we're going to hear a whole lot about Lakeshore Lodge, even though it's very far along in terms of construction. DVC is big business for the Florida resort. These type of timeshare contracts are leasehold arrangements where purchasers own the right to the association for a set number of years, typically that's 50, before ownership of the entire complex reverts back to Disney. So again, even though construction is going very quickly at Lakeshore Lodge, construction is all the way up to the top floor right now, I'm guessing Disney doesn't want potential DVC buyers to say, hey, the next new property looks pretty great. Maybe I'll not buy at the Poly and instead wait until Lakeshore Lodge opens and buy there. That is, I'm guessing Disney doesn't want to disincentivize anyone who is about to buy a set of points over at the Poly right now. So that's my setup. It's Wednesday, August 27th. That's my reasoning for why I think we're going to see what we're going to see. After a short clip of music, I should be back for the next segment, which I'll record in Florida, or at least that's the plan, where I tell you all of the things that I just got wrong. How the inclusion of India was simply about the expansion of non-bread service over at Sanaa. Also, how all of the other announcements at Destination D were about Lakeshore Lodge, even though this would be a very bad business strategy for Disney. Or maybe there were absolutely no announcements at all, so when I come back, maybe we're just talking about rum drinks and pirate skull mugs at Beacon Barrel. Whatever it is, I should be back recording a segment in my hotel room in about 3 seconds. That is, 3 seconds from your perspective. I still have to get on the plane and fly there. So I'll see you after this short bit of music. So to get this episode out as quickly as possible, I'm recording up my thoughts on day one here on Saturday, and then tomorrow, or perhaps on Monday, I'll finish off with my thoughts on what happens on Sunday. First off, the feel and presentation style of Destination D this year is significantly different than the presentation tone of earlier years. In years past, the focus was on panel discussions, largely focused on the history and, to some extent, the future of the company. These presentations were conversations and often arranged around the work of archivists. Some of those presentation elements are still here, but the centerpiece of the event has shifted. It's become more like a D23 Expo Lite, with some presentations having the choreographed feel of those presentations at Anaheim that would have been presented at the large hall D23 or at the Honda Center this past year. The Destination D event this year started with live music, projections across the room, and a multi-image offering across a dozen screens. At least Saturday had a celebrity host, Jodie Benson, the voice actor for Ariel. The room was also far larger than that of any previous Destination D. The presentations are held in the Veracruz Ballroom at the end of Coronado Springs, which holds about 4,000 people. That is, capacity here has doubled since the last Destination D 2 years ago. So now for the announcements. Was there a large park-related event announcement for India? Well, no, but there's definitely something going on here. The short presentation on India overviewed Disney's storytelling as it relates to that country. And honestly, there's not much. Most of the films and projects I mentioned in the first segment got a shout-out. The Jungle Book, Mira Royal Detective, and even an image of Mumbai Madness. Also added in were some live-action titles, including Jon Favreau's 2016 live-action remake of The Jungle Book, but also there were some really deep and kind of unusual cuts included here. The third Cheetah Girls movie, subtitled One World, and this Cheetah Girls film premiered on the Disney Channel, not in theaters. And a 2014 film, $1 Million Arm, which didn't do particularly well at the box office to the point that I don't think it even broke even. So what's going on here? Other than the 2 Jungle Book films, none of these titles are front-list Disney offerings. So here's my take on what we're seeing, and more or less this is what I highlighted in the opening segment. Disney is asking fans to see these 4 countries as uniquely connected to Disney: Japan, China, France, and India. We've already talked about how the other 3 countries, Japan, China, and France, all have Disney parks, World Showcase pavilions, and so on. The presentation order at Destination D with India first is beginning to invite fans and also investors to see these 4 countries as similarly connected to Disney, even though at the moment Disney's official connection to India is far smaller than that of the other 2 countries. What I see here is some likely repositioning in the company's image, in which India, let's say in a few years, will have some big announcements that will put it more in line with those other 3 countries. My guess, there's probably some early talks and explorations for a possible park in India going on last year and this year. India is the most populous country in the world, slightly beating out China at the moment. It's also a country that's experiencing robust economic growth with a large group of younger skilled workers that then projects out continued growth moving forward. So I think what's happening here is Disney is quietly laying the early groundwork to possibly prepare for a later announcement. So when that happens, the concept of India as a core Disney country will be somewhat familiar to fans. Anyways, that's my take on what I see as one of the most unusual elements to be wedged into this year's presentation, one that, to round out its time slot, pulled in movies that are now almost completely forgotten. Just as the D23 event in Anaheim had different presentation nights for studios and for Imagineering, that seems to be the path we're now sort of slanting toward with Destination D. The big presentations for Saturday were focused on upcoming theatrical releases with some actual announcements there. For the most part, these announcements came from a single person on stage setting up either a trailer or a new set of clips, with a couple of notable exceptions, and these exceptions are interesting. The presentation that filled out the stage with the most people was for the Pixar film Hoppers. On the stage was the producer, the director, voice actor Bobby Moynihan, who plays the Beaver King in the film, and the voice actor Piper Kudra, who has the lead, Mabel. For this segment, Disney showed enough extended clips to assemble an outline for the entire plot. Mabel, a college student and an animal lover in a nearby scientific lab, has her consciousness transferred, or in the lingo of the film, hopped, into the body of a mechanical beaver to communicate with other animals in the wild. The project's goal, it seems, is to safely move animals from one local region to another, communicating to them through Piper via the mechanical beaver setup. The catch here is that the mayor of this town is developing a road expansion project that will destroy the glade, essentially a beltway overpass that moves through open areas where the animals presently live. Once Mabel, whose consciousness is now in that mechanical beaver outfit, meets up with King George and the other beavers, she becomes deeply sympathetic with their plight and embarks on a plan with the real beavers to convince the mayor to stop the road project. And by this point, too, the scientists are a little irked that Mabel still is in the mechanical beaver, and they now want their tech back. For this film, there were more clips, discussions, and onstage presentations compared to any of the other films. And so what's going on with this? Well, my take is that after Elio, Disney is now a little spooked by Pixar originals. Elio cost at least $150 million to produce. Some people who worked on the film said it was actually more, but we'll go with $150 million at the moment. Add in at least $100 million in marketing for a minimum of $250 million, though again, I wouldn't be surprised if the actual amount was higher than this. The film only took in $152 million at the box office, which Disney splits with theaters. This means that from the box office, Disney probably received around $70 million against a film that cost $250 million to make and market. But back to the Hoppers film. I did really like the clips they showed. Good character design, a lot of humor, but also I'm confused who this Pixar film is for. It's edgier than any of the earlier Pixar films. There's a lot of humor about death being a necessary part of life in the wild. At least in the 3 segments that we saw along with the trailer, there are no kid characters for younger audience members to relate to. This is a key part of many, though certainly not all, key Pixar films. From Finding Nemo to Toy Story to Monsters, Up, Inside Out, Soul, Incredibles, Coco, and so on. The youngest character, as far as I can see, is a college student, and the rest of the leads are adults. And the music is a collection of 1970s and 1980s pop hits, including the 1981 song Everybody's Working for the Weekend by the band Loverboy. I see this film as being skewed more for an adult audience than most Pixar films. So what I saw was an engaging concept, some very effective and comedic scripting, but also a film whose vision may make it difficult for this particular offering to find the type of large audience that goes out to see Inside Out and Toy Story. Again, the clips for this Pixar film, and also for the opening of Toy Story 5, which was screened, were both strong. The opening of Toy Story 5 involves a shipping container of Buzz Lightyear toys recently having fallen off a cargo vessel and now marooned on an island. These toys all wake up from their packaging, and after wandering around the island and finally at night noticing the stars, all have the instinctual impulse to leave the island and find Star Command. The audience responded very positively to this clip as well. At the other end of the spectrum in terms of audience response was a 5 to 6 minute chase sequence from Tron Ares. I don't mean the audience responded poorly, just a lot less enthusiastically. On the podcast here for the past year, we've had consistent opinions as to what would and what likely wouldn't do well for Disney this year. We've always talked about Tron Ares as the extension of a franchise that has never performed as well as Disney would like, though clearly Disney would like to have a successful near-future film franchise, in part to anchor other company assets, such as film-related attractions for Tomorrowland. If the clip is representative of the whole film, I think I'm now leaning more toward the side that this too is unlikely to be the film that lifts the Tron franchise to blockbuster status. There are some hardcore Tron fans. The film will likely open well out of curiosity, but unless the rest of the film exceeds this one clip, I don't think this film will have the legs to ultimately perform how Disney wants. And to close up the section on theatrical, Disney showed clips from Mando and Grogu. This film will do just fine. My takeaway here was this. For me, the 2 seasons of The Mandalorian had a tonal difference than that of the original Star Wars trilogy, even though the timelines are very close. The Mandalorian is set about 5 years after the ending of the original Star Wars trilogy. The Mandalorian, in terms of the TV series, had a central plot that was not focused on war or a resistance story. It's about the personal growth of a bounty hunter, essentially a business person. The clips for this new film, however, pull in a lot of visual elements that align its presentation more with the tones of the original trilogy. There's the Empire, Imperial walkers, stormtroopers, and so on. So it feels more like Mando and Grogu are entering a storyscape whose elements are reminiscent of the first Star Wars trilogy, specifically Empire Strikes Back. This, I think, is a really smart move. It combines the most popular elements in the Star Wars universe now with tonal and visual elements from the most popular and best remembered trilogy films. A couple final and important things that came out at the Saturday presentation. There were 2 parks-related announcements, and both fell easily under our rubric. They were both arranged around additions to existing attractions, and they were both for attractions in Florida. Remember, Destination D tends to have more of an emphasis on Florida than on California, though there are usually a smaller number of announcements for California. The first announcement was relatively minor. This was a crossover announcement that attached a park attraction to a film, but it wasn't the one we were expecting. It wasn't for Stitch 2 and a Stitch element in the parks. It was for a new lighting and sound package for the Tron coasters that are located in Florida and Shanghai to align them with the new film. I believe mostly this means the coaster canopy will pick up the red and orange tones, which are the dominant colors in the new film, and the aerial loop will include music from 9 Inch Nails, which also provides the film's soundtrack. To be honest, this particular announcement was somewhat vague about what this would exactly entail, but as we're talking about a temporary change to the attraction, I think we're mostly talking about lights and music that will then be changed back once the film's promotional period is over. The second announcement, though, is more interesting. Disney announced that the Carousel of Progress would go down for a lengthy period to be updated. The attraction has been updated many times previously, typically with an eye toward having the family on that final stage use near future or at least modern day tech in the final sequence. So long to those mentions of laserdiscs and VR and hello, I'm guessing AI. But along with this, the show will include an entirely new stage, one that features another version of the Walt Disney animatronic that was recently installed at Disneyland. So some of the history-focused elements recently added to the California park are now headed to Florida. There was one piece of artwork only, which showed Walt surrounded by elements related to the 1964 World's Fair, and also some other future-looking elements associated with films in the parks. There's a miniature display of the Tower of the Four Winds, a print of the Lincoln animatronic, a painting in progress of the Progress City model, as well as a tiki bird, the John Hench painting of crossing monorails, and so on. The Walt figure here is also wearing a very specific blue cardigan sweater with a white shirt and tie. This was the exact outfit that Walt wore for sections in an episode of his weekly show called Disneyland Goes to the 1964 World's Fair, in which he explains how the carousel will work. Almost surely part of this discussion will show up in this updated attraction with those lines given to the new Walt animatronic to speak. And as a side note here, as Disney has been searching for elements that it can use to frame both a summer and winter ad campaign for the Florida resort in 2026, I think a good guess here is that these updates will premiere to support one of these two peak holiday times next year. Again, that's only a guess. Almost surely there was a conversation about what could be added to the Florida parks with an opening date next year. And out of that desire, and probably also with some other discussion elements mixed in, this project, I'm guessing, likely emerged. So that's what we have for Saturday. Sunday is almost surely going to slant more towards parks-related announcements. And after a little bit of music, and also after I get a little bit of sleep, we will come back, and after I see those announcements tomorrow, we will jump into that. On Sunday, we got another set of announcements, though honestly not nearly as many as I had hoped. But again, there are some interesting things here, and I'll talk a little about what I see in those announcements. The day started off with a villains panel with ties to Imagineering, so many attendees there believed that this would have some meaningful reveals in terms of the villains land at Disney World. Last year, we learned that there would be 2 rides along with dining and shopping, so maybe Disney now was ready to identify one of those elements? Or maybe there would be a name for the land, or maybe we'd get a more realistic overview which shows how the land will be laid out as opposed to the one piece of art last year that mostly set the mood. But we didn't get any of that. Instead, we got the story of research that the design team has recently done to develop designs for this land. The Imagineering team visited Paris and Barcelona to explore Art Nouveau architecture. This is architecture often inspired by elements in nature, which often has organic flowing lines and elegant flourishes. Beyond this, the team mentioned that they were interested in, among other things, finding architecture that might represent vines that have turned to stone. And this almost surely seems a reference to Maleficent and Sleeping Beauty. The Disney team gave this the term conjured architecture, specifically how decorative flourishes mimic patterns in the wild, likely with a little dose of magic. So this is a pretty strong suggestion that the presentation style of the Forbidden Castle in Sleeping Beauty, and maybe also the thorn-covered village of King Stefan, also in Sleeping Beauty, would be the main design tropes for the area. And then within that design, there would be elements that point to other villains in terms of architectural shapes and decorations. Along with this, and go down this rabbit hole for a second with me, Disney also announced which villains would be on the Disney Destiny. I use these here in terms of the Magic Kingdom project to frame out how Disney is generally thinking about characters that are classically defined as villains. For the Destiny, these characters include Cruella, Maleficent, and Dr. Facilier. These villains are among those we talked about in the intro section for the podcast today. They check off a lot of the character boxes we talked about. And if you add in 3 more villains that weren't discussed but were included in a visual montage for the Villains Land itself, Ursula, Chernabog, and Hades, I think you have a reasonably good idea as to the design direction for this area. Along with this, Imagineering partnered with one longtime animator to ensure that the presentation of these characters would match the artistry of their on-screen appearances. In recent years, animator Eric Goldberg has often filled this role, such as for Drawn to Life. This time, though, it will be Andreas Deja, who has animated, among other characters, Scar and Jafar. So, what this presentation suggested to me now is that Villains Land, and yes, as there's no official name, I guess we get to call it that for a little bit more, is at a far earlier point in its development than the Cars area. The Imagineering team appears to have been recently working through design strategies that would define the visual theme of the area, whereas the Cars area seems to have many of these things in place and have been for a while. In short, it sounds like right now the design team for Villains Land is working to assemble a style board to guide and unify their designs. This tends to be an early phase of development, but as I mentioned earlier, there also appears to be some land prep work just beginning to happen not only for the Cars area, but also for the area for the Villains expansion. So almost surely some type of early plot arrangement is in place, even if the architectural design elements for the buildings are still being or have just been locked down. And some of this is a little surprising because last year at D23, when this project was announced, there was the firm suggestion that the project was further along than where we see it now. Specifically, Josh D'Amaro said that the Cars and Villains projects, and here I will quote what he said, they're already underway. Earth is already starting to move. But now, a year later, it seems like we're just getting to that point. Then again, maybe there was some necessary redesign of the plans, and I'm just throwing this out there, possibly to satisfy that South Florida Water Management District's revise and resubmit order from months ago. Again, that's nothing more than minor speculation on my part. So we did get a small nugget of information on Villains Land, but not nearly as much as I had hoped. The only other announcement for the American parks on Sunday concerned Cinderella Castle at Disney World. The colors arranged for the 50th are going away. Specifically the royal blue, the dusty pink upper walls, the iridescent paint, and much of the gold accents. In their place, the castle will revert back to gray brickwork and walls and lighter blue spires, a shade close to cerulean. The crowd absolutely loved this announcement. Here's the key to making a successful D23 announcement. Simply explain that something new is going away and you're bringing back what used to be there a while ago, ideally a long time ago. In terms of practical elements here, my first thought after the announcement was that the light gray walls and brickwork are probably going to be a far more effective screen for the nightly projection shows that Disney places on the castle. Plus, during the day, the more restrained color palette will appear elegant in the Florida sun. So to close all of this up, and I realize we've had a very long episode today, I do have some final thoughts about all of this. First off, there was no mention of Lakeshore Lodge, even though that's the largest construction site on property right now, with buildings that are extremely noticeable and very far along in their development. Second, the placement of the Walt animatronic at the Carousel of Progress now leaves Hall of Presidents somewhat vulnerable for closure or deep revision at some point in perhaps the near future. Walt oversaw the opening of Carousel of Progress at the 1964 World's Fair. Though Walt didn't oversee the opening of Hall of Presidents in Florida, he did oversee designs for such an attraction going all the way back to 1956 for the Liberty Street project he proposed but never built at Disneyland. So in terms of Walt-related animatronic projects at Disney World, there are, I think, really three: Tiki Room, Carousel of Progress, and Hall of Presidents. Those are the three that I most associate with him. Tiki Room has a small footprint and it's in the middle of walkways. There's nothing really strong that you could put there other than something just like the Tiki Room, and therefore I think it's safe. Carousel of Progress is getting an update to the attraction itself, plus a new introduction stage with the Walt Disney animatronic, and therefore I think that is safe. Hall of Presidents, though, I think now is something to watch. Lincoln in California has been protected now with the addition of the Walt Disney animatronic on the same stage, but there doesn't seem to be anything new in the works to radically update Hall of Presidents, and therefore I'm wondering if there are plans now to close this. Beyond this, Liberty Square in Disney World, once Villains Land opens, is going to have some odd tonal shifts moving from the Hall of Presidents over to the Land of Maleficent. That is, we'll be moving from documentary attractions over to thrill attractions and fantasy attractions involving villains. I don't think that's going to be a smooth transition at all, and I think now we might be a little worried about Hall of Presidents going away or being radically revised, and perhaps for Liberty Square to have a somewhat darker tone to it, perhaps emphasizing other colonial stories such as the legend of Sleepy Hollow. Third, in retrospect, that set of preemptive announcements from the previous week about Rock and Roller Coaster Big Thunder and so on probably should have been saved for Destination D. In the end, the studio surprisingly had a list of announcements and reveals that were satisfying for Destination D, whereas Imagineering had far, far fewer, and overall they were less satisfying. Fourth, there are some projects that are MIA right now and not being discussed much. At the top of this list is Bluey, then the Avatar Land and Coco attraction at DCA, and then any updates for Avengers Campus where construction is moving forward fairly quickly. But also, even though there weren't a full slate of announcements for Destination D, or at least what I expected there to be this year, if you step back and look at Disney World, you'll find many ongoing projects right now, including Tropical Americas, their version of Cars Land, Villains Land, Monsters Incorporated Land, and so on. And I'll mention this again at the end because I think this likely maps out where we're going a few years from now. The Tree of Life Zootopia attraction, the one that opens this November, is drawing down on Nick and Judy, which to me suggests that Disney is exploring the possibility of perhaps using these characters more fully in a different attraction. The most natural place for this, I think, would be Animal Kingdom. And remember, we've already discussed this, the Animation Academy is about to leave Conservation Station and move back to the studios, which again to me suggests that Conservation Station might close in the nearish future. It's inexpensive to maintain area in Animal Kingdom and also has low visitation, which then might create a path forward for an expansion area in Animal Kingdom after Tropical Americas is finished. And lastly still, one of the big takeaways here for me is Disney quietly signaling that India is a region to watch in terms of expansion and other company-related products. At least to me, it feels like there's more going on here with this nod to India, besides the rather unusual opportunity to ask if anyone in the audience remembers $1 Million Arm or the third Cheetah Girls movie. And amazingly, I've managed to record the last of the segment on Sunday night. The audio still needs to be edited and finalized. That's going to take me a few hours. But I hope to have this out sometime on Monday, which is actually earlier than I had expected. And with that, we have now worked through all of the significant announcements from Destination D and what they suggest about the future of the Disney company. I'll be back next week with a new episode. Lastly, as you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just two things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions, specifically by listeners who join us over on Bandcamp as monthly subscribers. On Bandcamp, you will find over 300 episodes not available on iTunes or anywhere else. But the best reason to join us there is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can support us by becoming a monthly subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in our show notes. So, until next Sunday, this is Todd James Pierce.